Dragon Ball Z Kakarot was developed by CyberConnect 2 and published by Bandai Namco. And this game is an expansive RPG game that serves as a retelling of the Dragon Ball anime series. And for the most part, the game succeeds at being just that, a faithful recreation of the Dragon Ball Z anime in video game form. Now, there have been dozens upon dozens of games over the last few decades that have been licensed under the Dragon Ball name. Immediately, just for the simple fact of regurgitation, a lot of people did not have interest in this game simply because, oh, it's another Dragon Ball game. You know, what makes this one different from all the other dozens of games that have covered this anime series? Well, what makes Dragon Ball Z Kakarot different is the fact that it's primarily, solely a single-player experience. This is not a fighting game. This is an action-adventure game that is an RPG. It's an open-world ARPG. And the last game that was kind of similar to this, that was a Dragon Ball game, was Dragon Ball Z Sagas, which came out like 2 console generations ago, and that game was terrible. And the reasons for that, aside from the fact that it only covered up to the Cell Saga, was that it didn't really capture what was great about Dragon Ball as far as the actual action of the series itself goes. Pretty much everything you did in Sagas was very grounded, and that game didn't make use of the flying aspect that the series is known for. Well, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot does. In fact, that's most of what you do throughout the game. You fly around in these big, expansive hub locations that you can fast travel to. And when you first start playing the game, you know, it's pretty interesting seeing some of these locations from the anime series being recreated in modern HD graphics. But the novelty quickly wears off, I'd say, within about a half hour, because you realize that what you're doing is essentially just flying around and collecting orbs, and that consists of most of the gameplay loop, and the orbs you use to actually level up the characters, and that's not really interesting. And then they also have the side quests that are in the game, and the side quests aren't interesting. They're not fun. There's nothing engaging about them, and they actually slow the pacing of the game down. And clearly they were put there to pad out the experience. And this is something I've been noticing more from RPGs as of late, is that most game developers cannot come up with scenarios that are interesting enough for the player to spend time doing these side quests in these RPG games. And Dragon Ball Z Kakarot suffers from the same thing. It's not fun going around helping NPCs in this game when they ask you to, basically go and collect this, or go and fight this thing, destroy this target. And, the side quest is like around 5 to 10 minutes long, and there's just, you don't go to any interesting, locations outside of the main hub area that you're in. You don't encounter any, special enemy NPC characters. There's really no story to these side quests. It's a simple matter of, this NPC needs help with this one specific thing. Yeah, you go and you spend a few minutes helping them, and that's it. And that's not fun. It's not interesting. It's not engaging. And so the game is extremely weak with the side quests. The exploration is also weak because there's really nothing to do in these big hub maps or whatever that the game is filled with. And sure, you can, fly around and fight enemy NPCs or whatever consistently, but like I said, that gets old really fast when you realize that the actual content of the game itself is actually pretty weak for what it is. Another thing is that exploration is hampered in this game because there are these random encounters that take place in this game where enemies will just pop out of nowhere, basically out of the game's ass, and just chase you around. Sometimes you just can't get away from them, and you're forced into these fights that you really don't want to play, simply because you want to make progress in the game and spend your time doing, something else that's more important than playing these random encounters. And so that's another mark against the game. The random encounters is unnecessary. It's something that the game developers could have omitted from the game, but they didn't. I'm not really sure, why that is. But the random encounters are extremely annoying in this game. And as far as like content that's kind of Dragon Ball related in this game, the Dragon Balls, you can go around and collect the Dragon Balls in the game. They'll randomly appear like after you collect them and you summon Shenron or whatever and make a wish. They'll disappear like how they do in the anime series, and around 20 minutes later they'll pop back up on your radar, and then you can go around and collect them again. And you just have to load the different hub locations, and the game tells you exactly where they are, and you collect them. You make a wish, they disappear. 20 minutes later, they'll pop back up again, and it just loops. The wishes themselves are not really interesting. They do have a few wishes where you can replay some of the bosses from the story mode in the game, but that's not really good in-game content because it's something that you've already done before, earlier in the specific playthrough that you're on. They didn't really come up with any unique or interesting wishes in the game. And so collecting the Dragon Balls feels like a waste of time in this game. They could have been handled a lot better than what they were. As far as the RPG progression goes, that's also pretty weak in the game. They have this community system or whatever, which is called a community board, and what it is you gain these character icons from playing through the story, and that's based off the characters' relationships from the actual anime. And if you pair them up the right way, they'll give you buffs, and they have different community boards for different things. Like they got one for cooking. They got one for like increasing your combat ability, like your strength and all that. But just about all of the community boards are pretty useless, and there's really no reason to spend time, and there's really no point in trying to figure out how the system actually works. It's pretty unnecessary to get through the game successfully. And it just seems to be another one of those things that clearly was an afterthought during the development process for this game. And so, all the way around, the content of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot is weak. The side quests are weak. The exploration is weak. The RPG progression is weak. The question remains, what's the point of this game? Why did they even bother spending time, trying to build a budget to develop this game? Well, the fan service is the one saving grace with this game. If you're a big fan of Dragon Ball Z, this is the most faithful recreation of the Dragon Ball Z anime in video game form to date. And it's probably going to remain that way because I don't see too many of these games being made, going forward into the future. And of course, you have a few different playable characters in this game: Piccolo, Vegeta, Gohan, Trunks, and Goku. Other characters such as Tien, Yamcha, and Krillin were delegated as side characters. They're basically your supporting characters in the game. And so those characters aren't playable, but The rest of the main cast of the Z Fighters are playable, and they each have their own skill tree. They each have their own, unique skill set. But of course, the problem with this game being an RPG is that the story of Dragon Ball Z is very inconsistent as to, which characters actually get screen time, basically. There are some characters that you'll play as for one specific part of the story, and then you'll almost never see that character again as a playable character for pretty much the rest of the game. Examples of this include Piccolo and Trunks. And the supporting characters, they also have their own skill tree, like Krillin has his own skill tree, Tien, Yamcha, they have their own skill tree. Some of the other supporting characters, such as Goten, Kid Trunks, Android 18, who's also a supporting character in the game, all those characters have their own skill tree, but they also have their own level progression, and there's no reason to use them because some of those characters you don't obtain until very late in the game. And by that point, the main characters themselves, such as Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan specifically, those characters are so powerful by the end game that the other characters just become basically a waste. It's not really the fault of the game or the game developers as much as it's the fault of the story of Dragon Ball Z itself. But that leads me to question why they decided to make this an RPG. The game would have been better served as just a straight action adventure game rather than an RPG game. But if they just made this a straightforward, action adventure game, then it wouldn't be long enough to justify, a $60 price tag. So I think the biggest problem with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot isn't necessarily the length or anything. I think the problem with this game goes back to its original conception. This game probably shouldn't have been made. It's not a good RPG game. It's really not a good open world game because there's really nothing to do in any of the open world hub locations that are in the game. And even as a faithful retelling of Dragon Ball Z, there are still omissions from the show and from the original anime that are kind of head scratching. Like, why did you guys take liberties with certain things in the story that just, if you're a big fan of the show, it didn't happen that way. And there's a few examples of that in the game. Yeah, so all in all, this was for fans of the show. And when I say fans, I mean the hardcore fans of the series. For anyone who doesn't care about Dragon Ball Z, never seen the show, but may have some general interest in this game, simply because of the way it looks, there's no reason to invest in this if you're not a hardcore fan. There's nothing here for you if you're not a hardcore fan. I myself am a hardcore fan. That's why I got the game. Along with the fact that, I knew there were multiple playable characters, but it doesn't justify, the $60 that Bandai Namco, asked for this. The asking price was way too high for this. And so if you're not an achievement or trophy hunter, basically once you beat the game, that's it. There's nothing else to do. It's pretty much a one and done type of game. And that's something I'm starting to really see that's an issue with video games in 2020. And so that's what I got to say about Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. It's a decent game. It's not a bad game at all. It's just it has a very specific audience, and if you're not in that audience, there's nothing here for you. And as far as the game being this faithful recreation of the anime series, to be fully honest, as someone who's seen the entirety of Dragon Ball Z more than once, you're better off just watching the show if you've never seen it before. A video game's not going to fully capture what was special, what's special about the series. You have to watch the original show itself. So it's really that simple.